afternoon. My name is Dr. Jason Munsell, Professor of Communication Studies. I don't smoke. I got this at an antique store. I thought it looked cool. These are computer glasses. Helps me see computer stuff. Snape died. That's bad. Okay. The lighting is not very good here, and so I'm going to do my best to walk you through Chapter 1 in our crisis communication class. I put together a PowerPoint, and I thought maybe recording it here in my office on campus, I could capture me, and then also on my monitor I could capture the PowerPoint, but that's not working out very well. So there's a couple things that you could do. You could just watch this and then see if you can figure out how to, like on a different monitor, you look at the PowerPoint, or else just watch this and don't worry about the PowerPoint, and or watch the PowerPoint or look at the PowerPoint, just listen to me, whatever. But in any case, my great hope is that this online lecture will help you better understand Chapter 1. If you've had difficulty understanding it at all, it's actually pretty clear-cut from my perspective. But slide number 1 just simply says Leadership and Crisis Communication, Chapter 1. It's a thrilling slide. Slide 2 takes you to the first part of the chapter. So if you haven't read the first part of the chapter, there's several little bullet points here. First, I say the whole first part of the chapter contextualizes their take on crisis. And so we have already talked about this. We did this the very first day, and that is they see crisis as sort of two things. They take the Chinese character, or the Mandarin character, or symbol, I should say, for crisis, and it is two characters there, a dangerous opportunity. And so, as I said the very first day of class, that's really the theoretical, conceptual thing that they're hanging their hat on. So they talk a lot about that. But then they also move on to talking about the importance of studying crisis communication. And that stuff is really, really important. And really every Chapter 1 in every single book that has ever been published offers sort of a justification for why the book's topic is important, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they also offer lots of various examples of various crises that you might be very familiar with on the very first page of the chapter. That would be Chapter 3. But here's some of the things that they say about why this stuff is so important. And what I'm also trying to do here is to help you with your reading, to showcase to you some of the things that I think are very important within the book. But this would be Chapter 1, paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right after they talk about dangerous opportunity. And again, this is the importance. If we do not study crisis communication, organizations and the many people associated with them are likely to be stunned, frightened, and depressed when enveloped by a crisis. In fact, some organizations communicate so poorly in wake of a crisis that they are forever weakened, having lost the confidence of both their own members and the public. And then this stuff is very, very important. I mean, organizations, whether it's a community, a college, a company, whatever, I mean, they can be completely and utterly destroyed, not just because of a crisis, but because they have or had very poor crisis communication. So this stuff is very, very important. And then it talks about what this book is about when it moves to the book talks about what the book is about. And then on page 5, and it's basically what every book does. Like this has this preview of what you're going to read throughout the entire book. So that's generally the first few pages. Crisis, dangerous, opportunity, the two things, hinting at the whole discourse of renewal. This stuff is important. This is what we're offering you. Here's the preview. And then we finally get into the definition of what crisis communication is. And this is sort of complex, I guess. Well, not really. It's pretty easy. But they start off with sort of an old perspective, an older perspective that's growing out of, who's this guy? Herman in 1963. And it talks about how crises are unique moments in the history of organizations, blah, blah, blah. And that is the next slide. The slide that says, so what's the definition of crisis? And the first one is surprise. Surprise. Can you see this? Ah! My Weeble wobbles. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Here's a witch. This little girl doesn't see the witch. Here comes the witch. Ah! Ah! Surprise! So, the first component is surprise. And that is, we didn't see it coming. I think the book has a pretty good example of the FedEx stuff, and actually put those links if you want to watch it. It's pretty funny. So the FedEx dude has a computer or whatever, and then he, instead of delivering it, he just throws it over a fence. And that's the first link. So here's the FedEx Corporation. This thing went viral. Surprise! You have a delivery person who just threw a computer over the fence. And then you have the next little link I have is the response that they offered in light of the surprise. So the first component, I mean, to define a crisis, it's got to be, we didn't see this coming. It's a surprise. Ah! Hoverboard exploded. Ah, surprise! But here's the thing, and I have this also on the PowerPoint, my critique of surprise. And the way this book talks about issues of things that are unexpected and everything like that, I buy that. I understand that. Yes, there are surprises, but I think there's a lot of things that happen that it was like, yeah, we probably saw this coming. We just didn't care. We didn't really inspect the dams or the bridges. Knew they were probably in pretty bad shape. Dams burst. Surprise! The bridge collapses. Surprise! So, but anyway, that's the first component of this traditional sense of what a crisis is. So it's got to be a surprise. The second thing, this is the next slide that you cannot see, is a threat. So it's got to be a threat to something. And this says a threat that reaches beyond the typical problems organizations face. The threat can be financial, the organization's financial security, its customers, residents living near a production facility, blah, blah, blah. But threat, I mean, so there's they talk about financial thing, but when I think about threat, it's like people might die, birds might die. So they talk about BP. And they, it's I do disagree with some of the book when it talks about that. It says on the bottom of page 7, oil spills occur with some regularity worldwide. They are usually contained quickly, causing little long-term damage. Oil spills seldom reach the crisis level. Why not? I would think any oil spill is a crisis. but apparently not. It's got to be huge, really a big threat. So it talks about how BP, by the way, BP stands for, or used to stand for, British Petroleum, but not be prepared. They say in BP's case, however, the amount of oil spill created a heightened threat level. Ultimately, the crisis became the largest environmental disaster in U.S. history. Thank you, BP. So the second, so it's got to be a surprise, but then a threat to something, and it's got to be big, big threat. The next thing for it to be a crisis, next slide that you cannot see, you have to have a short response time. There is a sense of urgency. You gotta communicate quickly. You gotta, take care of things very, very quickly. And so that's sort of the situation. A lot of people sort of screw that up. It does. The book does do a really good job of talking about how BP totally screwed things up because they didn't communicate and respond very quickly. But you got to quick. So a crisis, you got to respond very, very quickly because it's a crisis. So definitionally, from basically Herman, 1963, our traditional sense of what a crisis is, it's some sort of event, but it's a surprise, it's a big threat, and we got to respond to fix things very, very quickly. That's crisis. Think about examples. Ponder. I like the calendar that I bought from my office for, was it 2016? It's just called America. This is the, you can see it, this is the January. It has Abraham Lincoln, America, kicking a thing since 1776. Awesome. Don't fall. Sorry. Now, that was the old sort of definition of crisis. We now have an expanded definition of crisis that our authors offer us. And that's the next section and thus the next slide. Expanding the traditional definition of crisis. And this is a very, very important, oh, there's a little review. That's not the next slide. The next slide is actually just a review of surprise, threat, short response time. Then the next slide is the bigger and newer definition of crisis. The definition on page 8 is unbelievably important, so please, please, please read that. Basically, this is what they call their working definition of organizational crisis. An organizational crisis is a specific, unexpected, and non-routine event or series of events that create high levels of uncertainty and simultaneously present an organization with both opportunities for and threats to its high priority goals. Now there's a definition. And then they go on, table 1.1, I say here, is fun. But it really sort of captures all the various components of what they see as an organizational crisis. And then the next several slides are just me trying to, are just sort of going through what each of these are. And it's, it's not really complicated stuff. But the first thing is, again, very closely to the surprise thing, it has to be unexpected. So we didn't see this happening. We didn't. Yeah, that's right. We didn't see it coming. Maybe we didn't see it happening. And now we know it's happening. But it's got to be something that